Shalom Aleichem to all my Yedidim. It's my pleasure to be able to learn a little bit together with you the avodas haktoris in Kodesh HaKadoshim b'Yom HaKippurim. The shir will be broken up in two halves. One half that will make Rabbi Gottesman happy, and that's the Lomdus. And the second part of the shir will be simply working through how the avodas haktoris looked. It's unfortunate that we never saw the Beis Hamikdash, and we don't really. It's hard for us to envision how this avodah went, and what was the tzuras hadvarim, and what are the protim in each case. And I would like to a little bit go through that so that we can envision it a bit. And even though we can't actually experience it, but at least we should be able to have it in our mind and our hearts. And when we say the payet when it comes Yom Kippur, we should have some kind of way to connect with it. So we're going to begin. Really, Rabbi Gottesman gave my share. I gave him all my Mara Mekoimis. But maybe I'll just put it into a little, I'll put a little bit more order, and maybe we can come out with a clarity. The Torah begins in Pashas Achrei Mois. When it begins the avodah of Yom HaKippurim, the Torah begins Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, daber el aharon ochicho, va'al yovoi b'chol eis el hakodesh mibeis laporoiches. He should not come into the Kodesh HaKadoshim every time he wants. B'chol eis el pnei hakapoires asher alo oroin, v'lo yamus, and if he keeps that, he won't die. Ki be'onon eiroa al hakapoires. Rashi explains over there, what does the pasuk mean? Ki be'onon eiroa el hakapoires. So Rashi says two pirushim. In one pshat, Rashi explains that means ki be'onon eiroa el hakapoires means the Rebbeinu Shalom finds himself and is seen on the kaporis. That means his shchinosi matzui sham, Rashi says, ba'onon, in an onon, in a cloud. That was the form that Kaviyochel, the Rebbeinu Shalom, showed his presence in the Kodesh HaKadoshim through being in an onon. And therefore, it's not a place that Aaron HaKohen should just come lightly, and if he does, Chaz v'sholem, there's an oynish. In the second pshat, Rashi explains differently. Ki be'onon eiroa el hakapoires means that there is one way that he can be seen. That means the Rebbeinu Shalom agrees to be seen. One way, be'onon. That means, if you come without an onon, what does this onon mean? The anan haktoris, Rashi explains. If you come with the anan haktoris, then I can be seen like a kaporis. Then I'm allowed to be seen. But without an onon, you're not allowed to see me. So that means in this pshat, ki be'onon is a positive thing. Ki be'onon kaporis is the way you're allowed to see me. It's a tanai. If you come with the anan haktoris, you could come in. So what's bothersome with this Rashi is, it's not the only thing that one has to do in order to be able to come into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. There's a whole avodah. You could bring Torahs. Torahs is one of the things. There's Torahs, there's parachatos, the dam of the parachatos, there's the dam of the parasor. There's many avodas that one can do in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Only by the Torahs could you come into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. You can come into the Kodesh HaKadoshim to do the dam, Asor, Par, Torahs. Why did the Torah? And this is not the place that the Torah is talking about the mitzvah of Torahs, because the Torah continues later, and it says, and you should come and bring it to the front of the parochas and go in and be makta the Torahs. So what's this ki be'onon eroah like this? Why is this new thing that ki be'onon eroah like HaPoros? So I think to understand this, we need to understand the avodas haktoros, which really those who were by the limud already know that there's two possible ways to understand the avodas haktoros. The partial way to understand the avodas haktoros is that just like on Yom Kippur, one had to bring a par, and the Kohen Gadol had to bring a par, and Klal Yisrael needed to bring a soyer, and they had to do a soyer hamishtaleyach that was outside of the Beis HaMikdash. There was a whole bunch of mitzvahs on Yom Kippur that in order for Klal Yisrael to do the avodah that what they needed to do Yom Kippur, one of the things they had to do was Ktoros. It was a self-standing avodah, just like the par, and just like the soyer, and just like everything else. One of the avodas was to bring a Ktoros. And we know every day there was Ktoros brought every single day, but the Ktoros of every day was brought into the Heichal. It was on the Mizbeach HaPnimi. And on this day, they brought Ktoros in addition. We know some people make a mistake. They think that there was Ktoros like every single day on Yom Kippur too, on the Mizbeach HaPnimi. In addition, there was another Ktoros to bring Ktoros into Kodesh HaKadoshim, but it's a self-standing avodah, like the Ktoros of the Heichal. And the other way to understand that the Ktoros is somehow that the Ktoros is a hachana. The Ktoros is a help or a hachana or preparation for some other avodah. Or it's a preparation for one to be able to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, or for one to be able to do avodah in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. It needs to be preempted with a Ktoros. And that means that Ktoros is not an avodah kishalatzmoi. It's an avodah that's made to help out to do other avodas. Either if you have to go into Kodesh HaKadoshim, you're not allowed to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim without bringing Ktoros, which is a hachana to going into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Or the Mokum Kodesh HaKadoshim needed a Ktoros in order to be able to do the avodah in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And these are hachana rather than they're an actual avodah kishalatzmi. So we're going to spend some time seeing how there may be steers in this, and they may both be true. So those who were there by the Shir Achana learned the Gemara Masechta Yuma. With the Gemara Masechta Yuma, Daf Mem Daled, the Gemara says, Om HaRav v'chein Om Rabbi Yitzchak ben Avdimi v'chein Om Rabbi Lozer. Om HaKra, the pasuk says, "V'chipa badoi uvad beisoi uvad kol kahal Yisrael." The pasuk says that the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur is going to be mechaper for himself, for all the Kohanim, for Klal Yisrael. So bepashtus, each one is a separate thing. Badoi was the parachatos, and Bad Klal Yisrael was the Sora Pnimi. But the Gemara learns Eizu kapor sheshava loi v'lebeisoi, for his wife and his children, v'le'echov ha'kohanim v'lechol Klal Yisrael. What kapora was brought for everybody at one time? Habe'oimez de aktoiris. The aktoiris was the carbon, the kapora that was brought for everybody at one time. Frag the Gemara of Ktoros mechaperes? Is Ktoros mechaper? It says in Otoni Rab Chananya lamadnu lektoros shemechaperes shenema vayiten es Ktoros vayechaper alaom. The Torah dvere bishmol Al ma k'toris mechaperes, what is it mechaper? Al loshoin hara. Yovoi dover shebechashoi, something that happens in a hidden place, v'yechaper al ma'ase chashoi. So here we see that the k'toris functioned as a kapora kishalatzmoy. That means, just like Yom Kippur, there was a kapora sora mishtaleach, there was a kapora asora pnimi, there was a kapora apar. There was also a kapora called Taurus, and it worked and functioned as a kapora for Klal Yisrael as a whole at one time. So this is mashma that it functioned as a kapora kishalatzma. And I hope at the end of this year to come back, and I think that there lies a very important yisoid in the K'toris right here, that it tells us that this kapora of the K'toris worked for everybody together. And there lies a certain mile in the K'toris of achdus, that's a very powerful thing of the K'toris. And that could be as a reason why it's mechaper, and it could be it's a reason why it's a shmirah. Maybe we'll spend some time at the end. But the Gemara seems to say that K'toris is a kapora, kishalatzmai. And we also saw the Medrash Tanchuma. Medrash Tanchuma is amazing in saying the tremendous power of the K'toris and the tremendous love that the Rabban Shalom has for the K'toris. And basically the Medrash Tanchuma says, the Shah Shoyikon Godel, Noitles Aktoiris Boisai Machto B'Yom HaKippurim V'nechnis Lefnai V'Lefnim B'Beis Kodesh HaKadoshim Maksiv Shom V'Nosnes Aktoiris Ala Eish Lefnei Hashem V'Kiso Amnan Aktoiris Mai B'Chiso Loshen Mechilahu. The Kisa means it's a Loshen Mechila. Ke'inyan Shanema Kisiso Kol Chatoisom Selo. And the Medrash continues that when the Anan Aktoiris was Metame V'Oile, Upoina L'Maila, when it rise the smoke of the K'toris, he says, V'nasa Ke'eshkoil, it became like a wine of grapes. So Chazal said, "O Yodeya, the Kohen Gadol knew then, Sheniskapru Avonos Yisrael, Shanema Eshkol HaKoifer Doidili." That when the Rebbeinu Shalom calls Klal Yisrael the Eshkol HaKoifer, and therefore we knew that if we're K'eshkol, then there's a kapora. Loshen Koifer is a Loshen O Yodeya, Sheniskapru Yisrael, Sheniskapru Maisa. Again, one moment, yeah? No, I'm just on the shir. I was looking for you to get me on the shir. Okay. I'll speak to you later, okay? He's calling me from the Aguda. I thought there was something wrong with my, So, again, so the Anan Aktoiris seems to be as well over here a mechaper. It was mekaper itself. It was an avoider. It was something that was needed to be a slicha v'kapara for Klal Yisrael, and all these would sound like it was an avoider kishal atzmoi. Now, if this is true, it comes something that seems to be a question. And here we'll take a step and we'll put you into the frame, the framework of where the K'toris, where they were makted the K'toris. The Avodah of Yom Kippur had a very distinct order. The order is the order of the Psukim. Chazal tell us that all the Psukim in the Parsha of Yom Kippur are in order. If you open a Chumash and you read the Psukim, you'll know exactly the order of the Ved, except one pasuk is out of order. And it's nothing to do with the K'toris, it's a later point in the Avodah. Every other pasuk is exactly in its place. They did it exactly kefi Seder HaMikros. Now, if you look at the Seder HaMikra, a very interesting thing happened. The Kohen Gadol had to bring for the Kohanim a kapora called the par achatos. For Klal Yisrael, he brought the soir apnimi. There's a soir apnimi and soir HaEysonim. Soir apnimi means the soir that they were makriv. They sprayed the dam on the mizbeach apnimi and in the kodesh hakadoshim. Besides that, there was a soir hamishtalech, which there was a goyrel originally that picked the soir Lashem and the soir Lazazel. The soir Lazazel was the soir that went mishtalech. They sent it Lazazel, and that was mechaper for klais on averis. They had to do all the averis, while the soir apnimi had to do with the averis of the Beis Hamikdash. But the soir and the par apnimi both were brought to be. The Adam was brought into the Kodesh HaKadoshim and onto the Paroiches and onto the Mizbeach. So the first thing that they were makri, the first thing that they shechted was the par apnimi. Before the soir apnimi. This par apnimi they shechted. The Kohen Gadol was mekabel the dam. And now there was going to be a break. Simply, the Kohen Gadol should have taken out this dam, gone into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, did hazoyah with this dam on the Oren, and then come out, shech the soira pnimi, take its dam into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and they should do the avoid of the par and the soir that went in. They switched off. They first both went into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, then both on the Paroiches, then both on the Mizbeach. But that's not what happened. After he shechted it, and he was makabel the dam, right now, they marked the dictators. So they had a problem because the dam was not allowed to get hard. If it gets hard by coagulated, I think it's called, when it's sitting in one place, what would happen is the dam would become puzzle. So they had to have a kohen stand on the steps that went from the ulam, from the Azorah into the ulam. He stood there on the steps, on the Roth, the Ravi, on the fourth row of stones on the top step, which is a big step. And he stood there and he mixed it while the Kohen Gadol went and did the whole Avodah Zaktoris. And it seems strange. Why did Avodah Zaktoris come in over here? So, or one can ask, if you have to do the Avodah Zaktoris, why don't you do the Avodah Zaktoris before you do the Parapnimi? What happened right now in this spot? They do the Avodah Zaktoris. Well, we know it's Exeris HaKosov. The Pasuk put it here. But why? It seems strange. So when I learned this, it bothered me, this question. I looked around. So there's a sefer Balei Tosfos where he brings the choices of the Rivah, and the Rivah asks this question. And he asks it with a little halachic twist. He says, this avodah of the K'toras, you're in the middle of avodah of par. So that we have a rule that if you're in the middle of a mitzvah, when you have an interaction with a mitzvah, you don't stop doing the mitzvah and go do something else. So here you're interacted with the dam of the par. You just started avodah. So now you take a break. Okay, I'm going to do a different mitzvah. I'm going to do the avodah zaktoris. So the Rivah answers, you wouldn't be able to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Why? Because it says, "V'chisa anan haktoris v'lo yamus." Im lo kisa yamus. If you're not going to have the kisa of the anan haktoris, you're not allowed to go into Kodesh HaKadoshim. One can ask, how did they go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim in the first place? To be makti the K'toras, there was no kisa yet. So the answer is, as long as you're going in to make kisa, that's also not a problem. As long as you're going in to be makti the K'toras and make this kisa anan haktoris, that's fine. But you cannot just go into the K'toras, the Kodesh HaKadoshim, with no plans of doing kisa of the Orim with anan haktoris. And you need a kisui. And the simple explanation is that there was the Shechina, whatever this means, was somehow in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, you were able to see things, and it needed for the Kvoid HaShechina, there had to be a kisa. It had to be dark. It had to be covered with smoke. And this you were not able to see. And we're going to see later that it's a question how the Kohen Gadol was able to find his way in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. But we'll get to that. But the point is, there was a key. The Zohar HaKadosh says he closed his eyes. He didn't keep his eyes open, that he shouldn't see anything. Before he was maked the Torah, he shouldn't see what he shouldn't be seeing. He closed his eyes. But Pashtus, it could mean that the Kruvim were Ma'urim, and that shows a certain love that you're not supposed to look at, and you have to be covered that with the K'toris. So we're talking about over here that you needed this hachana in order to be able to go into Kodesh HaKadosh. And if not, you have Misa. So Memela, there's no choice. You have to be makted the K'toris right now before you go in, because you just want to kabel the dam. You want to go take the dam and Kodesh HaKadoshim to do the azois. You can't. You have a problem. Oh, you have a problem. Let's bring the K'toris. In the second teretz, he says something similar from the Ram Mifun Taisha, another one of the Balei HaTosfos. And he says that he brings a posik, our posik, ki be'onon eroa elakar poretz, is man sheyesh onon einoi mire kinenem ezev hashchina. Again, if there's an onon, you're at least going through the action of kilu covering up that you shouldn't be able to see. That takes away that you're being nenem ezev hashchina. So the kvoid hashchina, you have to have the K'toris in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and that is the right way you could go into Kodesh HaKadoshim. Only with that Hakdama could one go into Kodesh HaKadoshim. So again, we seem to see over here that the K'toris was not something that was ke'ilu kishalatzma. The reason for the K'toris is a hachana, so you should be able to go into Kodesh HaKadosh. You should be able to go in with the Dama Par, and that's why it belongs right here. You're going to be makted the Torahs before the Par. Before the Par, you don't have to be makted Torahs. The time of being makted the Torahs is when you need to go into Kodesh HaKadoshim. So that happens as soon as you shechted the Dama Par, shechted the thing, and you have Dama Par, you're ready to go in. Okay. This is Hakdama, an instruction that you should be able to walk in. You need to have a K'toris, so Memela, the makted the K'toris right now. So this, again, seems to sound like this is the right Zman to be makted the K'toris, because what K'toris' purpose is a hachana for the par. Now, without the Das HaTosfos, maybe you'd be able to say a third explanation why they were makted right now, the K'toris. Maybe something along the concept that I was saying before. We understand, we saw before, I said to you before, that K'toris is a mechaper. Medrash, the Gemara. The par is a mechaper. The soyer is a mechaper. We see that the Torah wanted that these kaparas should happen at one time. It doesn't happen that you first do the whole kapara of the par. You do the Heichel, the Kodesh HaKadoshim, then you do Kodesh HaKadoshim with the par, then you do the paroiches, then you do Mizbech, and then you take the Damasor and you do that. No, it's always mixed together. The par, then you do the Sor. The Sor, par again on the paroiches, again the Sor. And on the Mizbech, they actually mixed together the Dam and the par, and they did it together on the Mizbech. So that means we want all the kabbalas to be intertwined. So possibly the reason why they were makted the K'toris now is, again, to intertwine the K'toris into the kapparas. We need three kapparas. We need the K'toris, we need the par, we need the Sar. So they wanted to mix them all together, just like they did with the par and the Sar. So they were makted the K'toris right now to intertwine all three kapparas. And similar to that, the Riva brings B'Shem Rabbeinu Yosef. It says a similar concept that we don't want to leave the avodas of Kodesh HaKadoshim and go on to different avodas. But he has a more halachish cheshbon why they did it. But either way, it would be possible to explain it even if it was a kapara kishalatzmoy. But I see in the Riva and the Meram of Funtasha that they seem to say that it's not an avodah kishalatzmoy. Maybe it's a chonah kind of avoid. We gave us one of the Marmakoim is a shtickle from the Brisker Rov. The Brisker Rov has a letter where he brings the Mishnah, which we saw already in the Medrash, that there was when the Ktorin, God was makted the Ktoris in Kodesh HaKadoshim, it says, Nismala habayis kulay oshim. The entire Kodesh HaKadoshim is full of the smoke from the Ktoris. And then Yotze, he went out to Boloi, so you see, he didn't leave the Kodesh HaKadoshim until it's filled with smoke. So, if we were Medrash Yidden, we would say, because when it actually filled with smoke, he saw it like an eshkoil. The letter is of the Brisker Rov is in the back of the Brisker Rov, Sefer Daf Ayin Zayin. So we would say they waited to see that we have this tree, this eshkol, and they knew that it was the kapara. But in the Brisker Cheder, everything needs to be understood in a halachische, and the Rambam brings it as well. It's not just drush, it's brought in Rambam. It sounds like it was a criteria. You need to stay there until it's full of Hashem. So the Brisker Rov says a chidush, and he says that while all year, when they were maktik Torahs on the Mizbeach HaPnimi, the mitzvah was simply one thing, to take the Torahs and put it onto the fire. It was a haktorah. It was just like you put an aver on the Mizbeach to be mekayim the mitzvah of putting on the Evorim on the Mizbeach. It was a mitzvah to put on Torahs onto the fire. And that's it. You did your mitzvah. You fulfilled your obligation. That was your avodah. You had no other avodah. But there was a halacha that's so long that the cloud of smoke didn't rise, you could still be over me'ila in the K'toris, because it's considered that K'toris needs to fit, in order K'toris to be finished doing its job, it had to give out a... But that's how the K'toris needed to finish its job. Until then, the K'toris was still considered doing its job. But it had nothing to do with the void of the Kohen. He finished his job. As soon as he put on the K'toris into the fire. Yom Kippur, there was a new halacha. His avoid, the part of his avoid was not just to put the thing on the fire, to create an osham. Like we see, the pasuk says v'chisa ananak Torah. The Medrash dashens this as well, that this v'chisa is major. It's a machila. It means it's part of what's going on here. The v'chisa is Brisker Rov's v'chisa is adin. Avoid. One needs to make a v'chisa. If you need to make a vid, that's part of the avoid of the Kohen Gadol, even though it happens on its own. But you're not allowed to leave Kodesh HaKadoshim until the avoid is finished. That he brings from Reb Chaim, says this big chiddush, that if avoid is happening, on you, even if it's not happening through your action, but it's happening automatically, so long as the avoid is going on, you're not allowed to leave the place where the avoid has to take place. That's a big chiddush. Reb Chaim says Lagabe something else, and in there, where he says it, it's a tremendous chiddush, almost nobody agrees with him. But this is Brisker Rov, is bringing Reb Chaim's Yisoid, that you're not allowed to leave, and therefore, the Kohen Gadol was not allowed to leave the Kodesh HaKadoshim until there was a smoke, a cloud of smoke, because that was part of the avoid. So I was thinking that maybe we find that K'toris was a self-standing avoider all year. And it was a self-standing avoider to be a mitzvah, to be maktik K'toris. So, bepashtos, we said, every Yom Kippur, K'toris should also be a self-standing mitzvah as well. It's a kapara. It's a mitzvah, just like you maktik K'toris on the basis of Mizbeach HaPnimi, you had to be maked in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Because today the avoid was in Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Moshe wanted a K'toris. K'toris is the same mitzvah of K'toris as all year. But it was in Kodesh HaKadoshim. And that is a mechaper. It's its own mitzvah. Yom Kippur, though, there's a second component to the K'toris. It also needs to be the thing that allows the conditions of you going into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, so you should be able to get in there and do the avodah of the par and sword, because the Torah put a tanai, there has to be v'chisa, so that you shouldn't see the K'toris, otherwise you will die. Or there has to be a nan, you shouldn't be nanim as if Ashchina. There's a mitzvah to make sure that there's a K'toris, so that you can get in there with the dama par and the dama sword. That part is a new chiddush of Yom Kippur, that it's a new tanai, an additional component to the K'toris. And that's the reason, at least in this understanding, why the K'toris had to be in this place. Had to be bein shchitas apar. If you wanted to just be makti the K'toris for a kaporet kishalatzma, you could have done it earlier, or you could have done it later. But because it needs the second component as well, to allow you into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, so that new component needs a new halacha. And that is that it has to be an anam. Because we said that in order for you not to be able to see the Ziv HaShechina and that covered and that whole idea, it was be'onon eirah l'kaporos. You needed an onon. So that was a new halacha that was neschadish in the K'toris of Kodesh HaKadoshim of Yom Kippur, that it needs v'chisa. That's why all year in the avodah it wasn't there, because you only had the Torah's kishal atzmoi, the kapora. In Kippur, we have this new idea that it needs to be also a achana, and for that you need this additional halacha of bechisa ananak Torahs. I believe that maybe that this is the reason this would answer our question in Rashi. Rashi says, "Ki be'onon eirah l'kaporos." Rashi, "Ki be'onon d'ananak Torahs," you can come into the Kodesh HaKadosh. So we asked, you need a lot of things. There's por, there's sword. The answer is this. Rashi is saying the condition, the hachonah. This is a new thing. There's two avodas in K'toris. The one that says later, "V'lokach ma'amachta," that's talking about the mitzvah of K'toris. Ki be'onon is being miramed on the other part of the K'toris. The chelik of the K'toris that acted as a hachonah, as a condition to go into Kodesh HaKadoshim. That's a post miflatzmot. There is a condition to come into Kodesh HaKadoshim, to do the path, to do the sword. There's a condition. You need K'toris. You cannot go into Kodesh HaKadoshim without K'toris. It's not just another avodah that you do in the K'toris. Not just kiba onom and then you also have the power. No. This is the condition under which one can go into. That's the achana part of the K'toris. And then later the Torah talks about the mitzvah of K'toris. And they both collide and come together in one Ma'aseh HaK'toris. There is a Rambam that I think I gave in the Mara Mekoimis, that says something, and we may be able to take this idea a step further, but I think for now I'll leave it, because I think it's more kedai to go a little further in discovering the avodah of the Klal Yisrael of Torahs and Kodesh HaKadoshim. So again, I would like to go through now a little bit to say there how the avodah looked, and stop at different points, at different ideas and questions, halacha questions in the avodah of the K'toris. So we already said that K'toris has a special place. We saw the Medrash Tanchuma. I just want to also be matik. I'm not going to actually read the words of the Zohar HaKodesh because they're in Aramaic and they're hard always to understand, but the concept that the Zohar HaKodesh says that when the Kohen HaGadol went into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he heard the Koil HaKruvim, and they were singing and clapping, waiting for the Aktoris. But while he actually was marked the K'toris, it was quiet, b'chashoy. It was in complete silence. And the Zohar HaKodesh says that if the Kohen Gadol was Zoiche, then there was when he was makted the k'toras, there came out a tremendous, he says, reichen somim and reiches came from Gan Eden into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And he says that those reiches went into the chotem, into the nose of the Kohen Gadol, and he said it was miyashiv his leiv, and he became totally dovuk in the Rebbeinu Shalom, became totally connected, and he was able to daven and say tefillas that no other time, and we see the Kohen Gadol on his way out said tefillas, a special tefillah that belonged to this avodah of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And the Zohar says that when he finished the avodah, the kruvim started again singing and dancing. And when they heard those kruvim, he knew that Klal Yisrael had the kapara, and it was a tremendous simcha. So here again, it's just that from a different standpoint, somehow the Kohen Gadol, when he was in the avodah of K'toras, would know whether the Klal Yisrael was niskapa. Just like the Medrash tells us that the Kisa, there was a Mechila, Huadin, and the Zohar finishes, Ashrei Om Shekocholoy, Ashrei Om Sheshem Lekov. This is what we're missing. I think we're missing a lot, that we don't have that clarity where the Rebbeinu Shalom is holding, what's his relationship with us. We're missing that. And that was very obvious. So this avodah was a tremendous avodah. It was very chavuv to the Rebbeinu Shalom, but it also had a tremendous danger if he didn't do it right. In Bayis Sheni, most Kohanim Gedolim did not do it right. A lot of them were tzedaikim, and there wasn't a very high record of many people that did avoid it twice because they didn't make it. So this was a tremendous danger. There was a tremendous pachat to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, together with tremendous chus and tremendous chavivus, and they came together, and that is the specialty of the avodah of the Kohen Gadol. So I would like to proceed. So we said that the dam of the par that they shechted, they shechted the par, they were makabel the dam, the Kohen stood there and he mixed the dam, and now the Kohen Gadol has to do the avodah of Torahs. So what he did was, the Kohen Gadol, I'm going to try to give you the picture of what it looked like. Again, the Kohen Gadol is standing on the steps between the Azorah and the Heichel. If you know the picture of the Beis Hamikdash, the Beis Hamikdash, we have Mizrach going to Mariv. We're going from east, going to west. The most Mariv part of the Beis Hamikdash was the Kodesh HaKadoshim. East of the Kodesh HaKadoshim was what we call the Heichel and the Ulam. In there was the Menorah on the right side, and Dorim on the south side. And the Shulchan was on the left side, which was the north side. The Mizbech Apnimi was center, but moved up a little bit more east. After you wanted to leave the Ulam, you had to take steps down. Those steps down were those were the steps that took you from the Heichel into the Azorah. The Azorah was made of two parts, an Ezra's Kohanim and an Ezra's Yisrael. The Ezra's Yisrael was only the first Yud, that was the most eastern Yud Aleph Amos, 11 Amos on the eastern side of the Azorah was the Ezra's Yisrael. A Yisrael was only able to go in those Yud Aleph Amos. After that was the Ezra's Kohanim. Only a Kohen was allowed in. In the Ezra's Kohanim was the Mizbeach HaChitzon. The Mizbeach HaChitzon means the Mizbeach where most, if not almost all, karbonas were brought and their dam was sprayed on that Mizbeach. It's called the Mizbeach HaChitzon. There, in that Mizbeach HaChitzon, the Mizbeach HaChitzon had a kevesh, which was on the south side, and the Mizbeach was more north of that. So when the Kohen Gadol now wanted to start the Avodah Torah, he would go off the steps that were between the Ulam and the Azorah. He went down the steps, and he went to the kevesh. He went up the ramp of that mizbeach HaChitzon to go on top of the mizbeach. What did he need from on top of the mizbeach? He needed coals, because the avodah of the k'toras was that they had coals and they had besamim k'toras, which was different spices or different things that have a good smell if you put them on the fire. The fire that was going to be used was coals. The coals had to come from the mizbeach. On top of the mizbeach, there was 4 different marochos b'yom HaKippurim. Usually there was 3. On Yom Kippur there was a 4th one. The 4 different marochos were on the 4 corners of the mizbeach. The largest one was called the marocha gedola, and that was where all the karbonos were brought. There was, though, another 3. One was used from where they would take the gecholim for the menorah, to take fire from the menorah was another one. And then there was one for the k'toras of all year. And most Rishonim learned that the 4th one was for the k'toras of Yom HaKippurim. Now, if you went on top of, if you walked up the kevesh, which was, I said, was south, you would get onto the southern side of the mizbeach. On the southern side of the mizbeach, if you made a right turn, you would come to the corner of southern, southeast corner of the mizbeach. That was where the Marocha Gedola was. If you continued along that path, you would come to the northeast. Then you would go to the northwest. The northwest corner, according to some, was the place that they took the k'toras for Yom Kippur. But most Rishonim learned he continued further, and he went actually to the northeast corner of the mizbeach, and that's where he took the k'toras. He took the gecholim for the k'toras. Now, he took those gecholim. He had to take gecholim that were not, when you make a barbecue, you only want to use gecholim that are white because they don't have any fire. The fire is all inside. You don't see any fire. You just have heat. Basically, that's the gecholim you want. When you begin a barbecue, you have a huge fire. For the k'toras, you needed an intermediary gecholos. It couldn't be white. You had to see fire in it. You had to see like that red pot, but you couldn't see live fire jumping out. That was called loy chashois. And it was that type of gechelis that you needed in order to use for the k'toras. He went up with a machta. He took a pan, and this pan was miyuched. All year, this pan was used for k'toras. They took a pan. The pan of Yom Kippur was miyuched in 5 different things from all year long. Number 1, all year long, this pan that was used for take the gecholim for the k'toras was made out of silver, because it gets dirty and it gets ruined from sticking onto the fire. So what they would use is they would take a silver one and then they would empty it into a gold one, which they would actually use for the k'toras. Here they wanted to save the Kohen Gadol the work. So what they did was they used the actual gold one to do taking the coals off the mizbeach as well. So they just saved one, they didn't have to transfer it, and they used straight a gold one. And it was special gold. It was very red gold. And Chazal said it was called Zov Peruyim because it had to be doime, it was doime to the dam porim. And Tois Yom Tov says, because since it's taka doime to the dam porim, that's where they used it. So this very well fits in what we discussed in the earlier part of the shir, that the k'toras was a hachana for the dam porim. So here we have that a remez in the machta, it took on a red form, very red gold, so it should be doime to the dam porim. Another difference is that this machta only held 3 kav of gecholas. Usually that's 4. And the reason was because usually they used to transfer from the 4 into the gold one, which was made of 3. Here they used the actual one of gold, so they kept it 3. But you have to make sure that you fill this up because it says meloi ha-machta. So the machta had to be entirely full. This machta as well was very light and very thin because it was very hard for the Kohen Gadol to carry it with one hand. So they would make it very pliable, very not heavy, try to make it easy for him to carry. The 4th thing was it had a very, very long handle. It was an amma v'chetzi. It's about, according to the Chazon Ish, 3 feet. According to the Chaim, no, it's smaller than that. But we're talking about a long handle for the Kohen Gadol by this machta. And the reason was because when you have a long handle, part of the handle could be under your arm. Means when you hold it with your hands, the other part, the back part, will be supported by your arm. And therefore, it helped the Kohen Gadol carry it. It wasn't as hard for him to carry. And the 5th thing is the Gemara says in Yuma, there was a niashtik by this machta. And everyone wants to know what this niashtik was. So there's many different days in the Rishonim. And it's important to see this because you'll see that there's also a practical part that avoided, which we're not in touch with because we never did it. So Rashi learns that it means that there was a tabas that was attached to this machta that would make noise. And that would warn everybody that the Kohen Gadol is coming with the machta and to tell everybody to get out of the heichal or ulam, because once he goes to do the avodah there, everyone has to disappear from the ulam. There's an issa to be in the ulam. So they had to have something that made noise, and I guess he didn't wear the me'il, so it wasn't dalit begodim. So now we had something else that led the people on, and that was a ring that was attached to this thing. Other Rishonim, the Tosfos says b'shem HaYerushalmi, a very practical thing, and it really bothered me when I was thinking about this. You know, gold gets pretty hot. It was 24 karat gold. It gets pretty hot when you have gecholim in it. And the Kohen Gadol, after a while, by holding this couple of minutes, his hand should have got burnt. So Tosfos says, B'shem HaYerushalmi, there was a piece of leather as a handle on this machta, but it was nailed in, so it should become part of the machta, and it wasn't considered that way a chatzitza, and that was the nashtik that we're talking about. The Ritva says, B'shem HaGoinim, this nashtik was a cover, because if you have gecholim, eventually the gecholim lose their heat. So they wanted to contain the heat, so they covered it with a cover. Meir says that it had on the bottom of the machta, it had a way, it had a base, so that when the Kohen Gadol puts down the machta in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, it shouldn't tip over. So it had something that kept it stable, that the machta shouldn't turn over. Either way, this is all the differences of this machta that they used in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The Kohen Gadol would do now what we call a chatir, would stick the shovel in and pick up these things. Rashi says in Masechet Yom Daf Lamed Tes that this was an avodah. It only was able to be done by the Kohen Gadol, like all avodas of Yom Kippur, they were only able to do through the Kohen Gadol. Some Rishonim seem to argue and say that it wasn't avodah, it was just simply getting everything ready, and it could have technically been done by somebody else. He finished taking this machta, he went down from the Mizbeach, he went off the ramp, and he went back to the stairs where the person was standing with the dam apar. He went and he put down this machta on the same row, right next to the coin that was mixing the dam. He put down the machta there, and now they brought him from a place called Beis Avtinas. They brought him Ktoris. Now, those who say Karbonis every day and those who say Peitim HaKtoris, we say over there was Shin Samach Ches monim of Ktoris for the year. Shin Samach Hey was for all the days, and Shloshim Monim Yisayim Shemehem Machnis Kohen Gadol B'Leichofnev B'Yom HaKippurim. There was 3 monim measurement of K'toros that was used for Yom Kippur by the Kohen Gadol. These Chazal learned from a pasuk, it had to be hodek. It had to really, even though all year the K'toros was ground, this was ground even more. It was ground very, very, very powdery. And that was what they did before they brought it to the Kohen Gadol. Now the Kohen Gadol had to do something, had to fill up both of his hands with the K'toros. It means the K'toros had to fill Meloi Chofnov, the pasuk says, had to fill his 2 hands. So really, every Kohen Gadol had a different amount of K'toros that he brought into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. It depends how much Meloi Chofnov was. The Meir says that there was sometimes a Kohen Gadol that it brought a large amount, very large amount, and some brought a small amount. It had to do with the size of the Kohen Gadol's hands. What he did was he would stick his hands with his fingers face down. He would scoop into the kaf. It was into this thing that held the K'toros. He would put his hands in, scoop up, and make sure to fill up his 2 hands. When it filled up his 2 hands, it wasn't able to be overflowing, and it wasn't able to be empty. It had to be Meloi Chofnov, but not more than Meloi Chofnov, and not less. So you have to make sure to really fill it up well. The Gemara calls that Meleis Avoloi Gdushos. That means it wasn't over, like it wasn't a mountain. And that was Meloi Chofnov. He took this Meloi Chofnov and he put it into a kaf. This kaf was a klisharis. It was like a spoon that held the K'toros that he put in. And now it was niskadish b'klisharis with this kaf. And now he had the K'toros ready for his use. The Minchas Chinuch says, B'Shem Delech HaMishnah, that you had to do melech on the K'toros. Very interesting. We know Akol Korbon Chotak of melech. The K'toros was one of those things that needed as well melech. He then went with his kaf, and he picked up the kaf in his left hand. He took the machta in his right hand, and he walked towards the Kodesh HaKadoshim. I just want to point out, in the Shir Achana, there was a big arichos about this. I don't think we're going to have the time to go into all of that, but basically, the Gemara seems to ask that it should have been the opposite. He should have taken the kaf in his right hand and the machta in his left hand. The simple understanding would be is that the kaf was not an avoid.
Rav, if you need to go a little bit over time, the elam is not budged. So indulge us, please.
Okay. So the Gemara seems to ask that it should have been the other way, that the K'toros should have been in his right hand and the machta should have been in his left hand. The simple understanding would have been that bringing the kaf of the K'toros was an avoider, just like bringing the dam to the Mizbeach was an avoider. Bringing the K'toros to the Mizbeach or to the Kodesh HaKadoshim was an avoider, while the machta was simply a way to get coals. It wasn't really an avoider. It was a hachana to an avoider, but it wasn't an actual avoider. And therefore, it should have been the exact opposite, because we know all avoider in Beis HaMikdash was supposed to be biyamin. A lefty could not do avoider in Beis HaMikdash. Rambam says he's a balmum. So I wouldn't have made it. I'm a lefty. But a righty can bring his right hand, he brings the K'toros, and his left hand the machta. So the Gemara says he couldn't. It was too heavy, the machta, and too hard and too hot for him to bring with his weak hand, with his left hand. So therefore they had to put that in his right hand, and they had no choice, so they switched it around. So, Reb Chaim has this piece in his Sefer where Reb Chaim has a question: if all year the K'toros needed to be brought with his right hand, or it was enough to his left hand, he says, is Yom Kippur a din of Yom Kippur, or is it that there was a left hand, but all year it was in the right hand? Or no, do we learn from Yom Kippur that all year it's supposed to be in your It doesn't have to be in your right hand. L'chayru about it. L'chayru, the pashtus of the Gemara's hands, it shouldn't be like that. The Gemara asked a question, should have been the opposite way, where the right hand should have been the kaf and the left hand should have been the machta. So it would seem that it was only Yom Kippur that way but there's a big problem with this Gemara. All of a sudden, Yom Kippur, you're allowed to do avodah with your left hand. If it needs your right hand because you're weak, so you're going to do avodah with the wrong hand. What happened here? So we have the Tosis Yishalim that we spoke. That Tosis Yishalim seems to say that Yom Kippur was nischadish, that your left hand is as good as your right hand. Isn't that amazing? I think that the Mekubalim would have a very, very deep understanding of this, that on Yom Kippur, your left hand is as choshev as your right hand. This is that your midas achesed and your din, somehow this is but it's a very interesting thing that Yom Kippur, your left hand also was as if it's your right hand. And both hands are kosher l'avodah. And therefore, Yom Kippur, you can also do the avodah with your left hand. And that would make sense to say now, good, but you'd rather do it with your right hand. Why would you do it with your left hand? If usually the kaf is an avodah, it should have been done with your right hand. Why would you do? So the answer is because you're cholush, so you have no choice. You switch it around. But really, your left hand's good. So that is not like Reb Chaim. That's like the other side of Reb Chaim, that it's a special din of Yom Kippur. Because according to HaEysonim, was nischadish Yom Kippur that your left hand is good as your right hand. That's one side. If you want to go with the other side of Reb Chaim, you have to really say that the Gemara is really saying, of course, kaf is kosher all year with your left hand. But why punkt if the kaf is an avodah and it's gradik, there's no din of yamin. It could be even besmoil all year, but why would you do it? Normally they would do it with the yamin. Why would you purposely do it the opposite way when the macht is b'chlal nothing? And that the Gemara answers, because he had no choice. Either way, it's clear that here it was kosher besmoil. The macht, on the other hand, bepashtus was not an avodah. In Chazon Yecheskel says that it was an avodah Yom Kippur. It was a chiddush of Yom Kippur, because it says he should bring it al beis haparoiches, and he learns the special din that both are avodah, and he have to say that both hands are good, and both need this chiddush that the left and the right are considered an avodah, are considered good hands for Yom Kippur. Either way, there was this new avodah of bringing these things into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. It's so much. It's mistavra at some point that it's an avodah, because we know that there was a whole tefillah and new begodim to go into the Kodesh and remove the kaf hamach. That was definitely an avodah that happened. It was a whole thing. It was a whole separate thing that happened. It'll be in the tefillah revias. That's not the subject of today's share. The Zohar HaKadosh says a very interesting thing, that they tied a gold rope to the foot of the Kohen Gadol when he went into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. If he unfortunately didn't make it out, that's how they would pull him out. In Sefer Bris Menucha, it's a Kabbalah Sefer, but there he says that it had a dual purpose. If the Kohen was in the Kodesh HaKadoshim and he understood from things that were going on there that the avodah was not mekubelas, he would give it a tug, and the olam outside would start davening and crying and doing tshuva and preparing to hopefully be saved from this gzeira. So it had another purpose as well, because it was tied to his foot.
And it was gold. It should have been pishtan. It says avodah l'fnei l'fim. How would he make that gold in the Kodesh HaKadoshim?
So the answer is that only if it's part of the avodah is there a problem of l'fnei. That's there. Now, he had to enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim, so it depended when he did in the Beit. There was two different stages in Klal Yisrael, Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni. Bayis Rishon, the Kodesh HaKadoshim had two doors. It had an opening in the middle of 10 amas, and it was a wall that was wide a amma, but there was an opening in it of 10 amas wide, and it had two doors. Those two doors were always open. They never were closed. but they had two doors, they were open, and there was a paroiches hanging in that spot. When the Kohen Gadol wanted to go into the Heichel, he realized he had a technical problem. Into the Kohen Gadol, he had a technical problem. He had no free hands to pick up that. He had no free hands. He had no free hands to actually pick up the paroiches. So Chazal tell us that he used his thighs to move the paroiches out of its way, so he should be able to walk in holding this. Again, it's just because we don't envision it, it doesn't bother us. But I found it amazing, a Chazal touch, because it was real. It had to happen. And if you don't have two hands, how's it happening? How are you going to get in? So it got pushed away. The Kohen Gadol would go to the spot right in front of the Aron. Now, if we know how the picture looked, Bizman Beis Hamikdash, the Aron's two badim were being boiled, were touching the paroiches, and there was a protruding a little bit on the paroiches. We were able to see the form of the two badei ha'aron. The spot between those two badim on that side, which means on the eastern side of the aron, that's where he went to bring the k'toros. So what he would have to do is nudge away the paroiches, go in, and when he went in, he had to go into the spot. He had to push the paroiches out a little bit and go into the spot in between the two badim. And there he would be facing the eastern side of the aron, on which was on top of the Evan HaShasiyah, and that's where he went to do it. Now, the Yerushalmi says that there was no light in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. There was no, how'd you see? How'd you get into the Kodesh? How'd you find his way? So the Yerushalmi says the Oron was Meir Lo Haderech. The Kohen says that means the Oira Shechina. Means basically he was on GPS when he went into Kodesh HaKadoshim from the Shechina. It was showing him exactly where to go because he had no real way to see. The Zohar Kodesh says that he actually closed his eyes when he got in there. So he really needed GPS in his mind. The Rebbe Shalom led him to where he has to go because he closed his eyes so he shouldn't be nana from the kruvim that were mu'urim. And the Payet is meramas this. If you look in the Payet Ato Koinanto, when he talks about it, he says, Tim Einov v'shov la'choyrov. Tim Einov means he pashtas closed his eyes. The Beis Yosef, in the Sefer Beis Yosef on tour, is one of his girses. In Antikanant, he makes many shinu girses. One of them is this. He takes it out, and he says, Tor leiv pos, and he takes out this Timtum. And it's because he understood, like the Yerushalmi, that it came from the Or HaOren. And Mamela, he couldn't be goris Timtum Einov. But according to the Zohar, we could understand that he closed his eyes and somehow the Rebbe was Meir to him and he found his way. Anyway, in Bais Sheni, there was unfortunately no Aron, and as well, there was no Dalsois. It was two Paroiches. They were removed one from another in Amma, so it had the same Amma, but it was between two material Paroiches. And what he did was, the Chazal say that Paroiches that was more east, on the southern side, was bent up a little bit with a clip. And the other Paroiches, the inside Paroiches, was on the northern side, bent up with a clip. Because they didn't want anyone to be able to see in. So in two different spots, on the outside one, it was on the southern side, and on the inside, on the northern one, it was on the inside one was on the northern side. He would walk in with the Torahs and thing through the opening on the southern side. He would go along the whole entire length of the Paroiches, going from south to north. When he hit the northern side, he would go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and then he would again turn south and go to the Evan Shasiyah. There was no Aron, but he would align himself as if there was an Aron, and looking at the Evan Shasiyah standing facing there, that's where he would do the Avodah Aktoris. So the pasuk says, "V'nosan es aktoris ala eish lifnei Hashem, v'chisa nan aktoris hakaporis asher ala eidus v'lo yamos." So we know that Chazal understood that it means that they would put the k'toris onto the Gecholim only once he was in Kodesh HaKadoshim. Not like the Tzedokim. The Tzedokim understood Lifnei Hashem to mean in the Ulam, in the Heichel, and they had a raya that it has to be before, because it says, Ki be'onon and Roach HaKaporos, you have to come into the thing when you have already onon. That means they had a problem that I asked you before, that you're not allowed to see the Shechina, so there has to be already a cloud before you get in. Chazal knew the emes, and that's not the truth. And you were only able to actually do it when you got in, and they were mashbiyah the Kohen Gadol every year, as we know from the Mishnah. Is that we get to that Mishnah. I don't know if we get much further. That tells us that they actually did that, and they were mashbiyah him to. He has to do it in the right way, which is only to put it inside. Now, what he did was he took the machta, he put it down on the Evan Shasir, Chaim by his vision, Chaim by his sheni, in the spot that was right in between the bottom. He put it there on the floor. He put down the machta with all the gecholim, and that was put down. After he put that down, comes now a challenge. The halacha is that you're not allowed to put the k'toros from a kaf onto the fire. It's a machloikis. Some say it was all year that way, but definitely Yom Kippur, some say it's a deraisa, some say it's a derabanan. You are not allowed to. Pashtus was the rice. It says Meloi Chofnav has to come from Chofnav. Has to come from his hands. Now you realize it has to fill up two hands. So there's a technical problem. We have a kaf. You're holding it in one hand, and now you have to fill it up into your hands, and you have to go into two hands. So this is something that you can't do, the pashtus. Either you have to have someone else pour it into your two hands, or you're going to get into one hand, or you're going to have it spill all over. So Chazal tells us this was from the avodas akoshois shebamigdosh. To figure out how to get the kaf, flip it over, and it should come into two hands. So there's two different possible ways that it was done. One way was that they would put the kaf in his mouth. He would tip the kaf with his teeth and his tongue, tipping it, that the kaf should be able to tip over, and he would catch it in his two hands. The other way was that he would hold the kaf with his thumbs and flip it into the front part of his hands. I don't know how he did any of them. And it seems to have been a very hard avodah, and there was special kayanim in the Kohen Beis Hamikdash that would train the Kohen Gadol for this, and he would practice a very long time before, because if he messed this up, he would have to go right back out and bring more k'toros, because you have to have Meloi Chofnav. So if some of the k'toros fell on the floor, so this was a very difficult thing. Mistama, there was Ma'is and Nisim involved, that he had Siyata D'Shmai to get it right, but it definitely wasn't an easy avodah to do. And with that, I can end two more things, and we end the avodas haktoros, and that was, he then took his hands, and he poured slowly the k'toros onto the thing. How he did it was Machloikis Rashi and the Rambam. But Rashi learns that he would start from the most western part of the machta. He would put his hands over the most western part and start pouring out, and he would pull his hands out more east, while leaving a line of k'toros going from west to east the whole way long. It would be one straight line of k'toros. The reason he did it this way is we didn't want that his hands should be there while the smoke comes up, which would cause his hands to be burnt. So he pulled it back slowly. And then there was a special ingredient in the Torah called Mala Oshon that would make a fire that would go straight up. It would go straight up like a rod. And then when it hit the roof of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, it would spread slowly and turn into, like we saw, an eshkol or different form, and it would become totally dark. And we said before, at that point, became an Eis Rotzen for Tefillah. But the Kohen Gadol, in the Gemara, it says that the Kohen Gadol was not mispal in Kodesh HaKadoshim. He would go out, and right outside, he would go out with his back towards the paroiches. He wouldn't turn his back to the Oren, and he went out in the same way he came in, and he said right away a tefillah, and that was a very tefillah that we say in the Payat. You can look up in the Payat exactly what the tefillah was. I just want to end with the point that I was making before, in the specialness of Torahs, and I think that that's a lead that gives us a tremendous. We know we start Yom Kippur. We start with Kol Nidrei, but we start before Kol Nidrei. We say Adas Hamokoim, Valdas Hakol. Chazal tell us that's a special. You want to enter Yom Kippur, you need to say something special. What do you have to do? To be matir HaEysonim, they should become daven with you. Why? So Chazal, because ain't tefillah. There's no tefillah of Klal Yisrael that doesn't have to have Poshe Yisrael in the tefillah. And that's how you start Yom Kippur. You know what that means? Because Yom Kippur is a day of Kodesh Kadoshim. If you want to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, Klal Yisrael is needed as a whole, total, ganz Klal Yisrael. The tremendous achdus, the tremendous connection of Klal Yisrael, that's the power that Klal Yisrael has. If you can't take Poshe Yisrael, you can't go into Yom Kippur. If you can't go into Kodesh HaKadoshim without Klal Yisrael totally connected. Toires means you have chelbana. Where do we learn that even Poshe Yisrael have to be in Tefillah Yisrael? Because you have 11 Samamonim and the 11th one is the chelbana. You're bringing in the Poshe Yisrael, the people that are, they're not, we don't look at that. They're Klal Yisrael. That's why it's Mechapa and Lashon Hara. Lashon Hara is because we don't see the greatness of the person that does an Avera. We look at them as people. If we would realize that Klal Yisrael is a beautiful Klal Yisrael only because they have a chelik alikam imal, that the Rebbeinu Shalom's kids, everyone, all of them, that gives a tremendous power. Kodesh HaKadoshim and Yom Kippur, we should be zoiche. And that also keeps us away from Agefa. And boys, time Agefas come, Satan can only be shoylet a heart of Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael will be one. And they wouldn't be able to find a fringe. They wouldn't be able to find Balaveres as we make them Balaveres. But if we wouldn't make them Balaveres, we would make them in the Klal Yisrael. We would put them in. The Satan wouldn't be able to be shoylet. And that's the power of K'toyres, to be shoylet in Magefa. Maybe we be protected from Agefas. We should be going zoichet aksiv v'chsim b'toyver. And should be zoichet maybe still to the Kodesh HaKadoshim for the Yom Kippur. The Suris Toyves and a guten Tag.